We've all said it at some point. I'm just a creature of habit. And sure, there's a lot to say for consistency and routine. But what about that other aphorism? The only constant in life is change. Maybe we're creatures of change too. In this podcast, we'll explore change from a variety of perspectives. Stories of people who've made huge changes in the trajectory of their lives, others who've made small but lasting and impactful changes in their day-to-day lives. And we'll also just nerd out about the science of human behavior and how we can get better at executing the small changes and embracing the big ones. I'm Valerie Maritn, and you're listening to Creatures of Change. Hello, friends, and welcome to our first episode of Creatures of Change with a guest. I really am enjoying these conversations around the subject of change and transition and habit change and all of that. So this first conversation with our guest, Ray Holloman, was just really fun, and Ray is such a cool person. In fact, the bio that I'll read to you in a minute, I didn't even have before when we had our conversation. So I just kind of know Ray as a friend in town, but I don't know him well. And hearing about all the things that he's involved in, like, damn, this is somebody who is humble, but also, knows their shit. And has done a lot of cool things. So I hope that you'll really enjoy this conversation when Ray shares his story about gender transition and just life as a trans person and a lot of other changes that we discussed in the conversation. So I hope that you're really going to enjoy this one as much as I did. Couple of other things that I'll mention before we jump into Ray's bio. So I'm preparing for leaving on a 7-day silent retreat at the Insight Meditation Society in a couple hours outside of Boston in just a few days. And let's just say that I have not been training on the cushion as much as I maybe had intended to. So it's going to be quite the shock to my system to make such a drastic change of no technology, no writing, no reading, no talking, of course, no eye contact. Really, it's the writing and reading part that's going to be like the most hard, because if it were just the other stuff, but I could have my books and my journal, like, I'm good. I could be here for a few months. So that is going to be a huge temporary change for me that I will probably do a little bit of a solo episode reflecting on afterwards, either on here or on Bodyful, depending where I think it fits, or perhaps it'll be an overlap episode. So stay tuned on that. Hopefully I don't literally implode, but I'm really looking forward to it, even though I have some nervousness. So yeah, that's really all I wanted to share. And let's just jump into Ray's bio. Ray Holloman is a Black transgender man that lives in the South. His unique identity gives him the ability to see multiple sides of marginalized communities. Ray does disaster recovery for a large tech company and has a bachelor's of business administration from Belmont University and master's degrees from Lipscomb University and Tennessee Tech University. Ray is married with 4-ish dogs. You'll hear more about that in the convo. 20-ish chickens and 9-ish quail. He has worked in the past with groups including the Tennessee Transgender Political Coalition, the Trans Empowerment Project, Nashville Technology Council, and other various nonprofits, and currently chairs, and this is like a really long and really cool committee name, chairs the New Leaders Council Pride Caucus Transgender Education Subcommittee. Also, Vanderbilt University Medical Center LGBTQ+ Advisory Board, and chair of the Tennessee Department of Health HIV Prevention Transgender Task Force. Damn, Ray is doing some things. He enjoys sharing his story to educate the public about transgender and queer people, and in his limited, yes, spare time, enjoys farming, quilting, and cooking. All right, without further ado, let's jump into this conversation with Ray Holloman. Ray, thank you so much for doing this. I'm super excited.
I'm excited too. This is just awesome, and so I'm pretty excited about it.
Yeah. We are the only other time we really hung out outside of like a group setting was when we had to get together to discuss our shared love and disdain for Love is Blind.
Oh, shake. I'm just still angry about it. Honestly, it's been months and I'm still upset about it.
Yeah, yeah. Just I hope that Shake has gotten into therapy, but I don't think that's probably happened.
No, probably not.
So when I put out the call for like anyone who wanted to talk about change from whatever angle, you were like, I'm down. And
Yeah,
knowing that you are a trans guy, obviously that's a pretty big change that we'll talk about. But in general, it seems like you're someone who has kind of done so much change that you embrace it.
yeah. Which is kind of like counter to like what a lot of people think. Like when I do a change, like I think about it for a really long time and
Mm,
then do the change versus like, some people that are like really spur of the moment. They're like, oh, I'm just gonna go and like do this.
yeah,
And I'm
that's
like, no,
me.
I gotta like think about it for like 6 months before I'm like gonna do it. But then once I do it, I'm like fully committed to it. I'm like all
Yeah.
in
Nice.
completely.
Cool. So, yeah, I don't know if you want to start with talking a little bit about your transition as kind of like a big change, but then there's definitely other things around change that I want to talk about. But yeah, when would you say that all kind of started?
Yeah, so like I mean, when I was growing up, I mean, I didn't even know the word transgender. Like that wasn't
Yeah.
a thing. Like it
Hmm.
was not as prevalent in like the late 90s as it is today. And so I just knew I was different and like
Hmm.
I had to change a lot of people's mindsets in just like school of like what does a very masculine you know, feminine, somebody assigned female
Hmm.
at birth look
Hmm.
like. And I was like, because I was not it. I still remember my senior photos and like I begged and pleaded with the people to let me wear like the men's like thing
Yeah.
so I didn't have to wear like the drape because I was like, no, I am not into this. So I think I've burned every single one of my high school senior photos at this time.
Nice.
Uh, but yeah, so it was about 22, I guess. Like I had came out to my parents as a lesbian like prior to this, but I was
Hmm.
starting to realize I was like, lesbian doesn't really quite fit how I feel.
Hmm.
And I was like, am I comfortable just being like a very masculine lesbian, or like do I need to transition? So that was when I was 22. I didn't transition until I was 26. And
Yeah.
so I had like been debating about it like, for a few years. I was like, I didn't know if I was gonna have to change jobs. I didn't know like the partner I was with at the time, I was like, are they still gonna want to be with me? Spoiler alert, I transitioned and like 3 months
Hmm.
later we broke up because I
Hmm.
transitioned.
Hmm.
Um amongst a bunch of other things. But I was just like, I'm not happy. So I finally took a trip. I was doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at the time, so I went and did a tournament in Vegas. And people don't think you're gonna like discover yourself in Vegas. Like you go out there to like get drunk and party.
Yeah.
I did the exact opposite. I was out there for like 4 days by myself at this jiu-jitsu tournament. And so like I had a lot of times like I didn't have a coach, I wasn't staying anybody, I was all out there by myself. And so I was like, I had a lot of time to just really think. So that was also the weekend that like Pokemon Go got like exploded. So I'm like playing
Mm.
Pokemon Go in Vegas
In
and
Vegas.
just thinking, and I was like, I am not happy as who I am. Like I need to transition. If that means I have to find a new job, if that means I have to like do all this stuff, I'm like, because I'm not happy. I have not been happy with who I am, like in middle school, high school, college, working. And so I just got to do it. So I went to Vegas on that trip, and I was like, all right, I'm gonna come back to Nashville, and I'm gonna figure out how do I transition because this was 2016, but it still wasn't as prevalent as it is now. And to think that that's
Hmm.
only been 6 years ago at this point, and I'm just kind of like it has just seems like it has exploded. And so I was like, came here, found somebody that would get me on hormones, and I just started researching the internet of like, okay, how do I go about changing my name? How do I go about getting my driver's license updated? How do I do
Mm,
this at work? Because my work had no experience with it. So that was a
yeah.
huge change for them. Was like, we've got somebody that's been here this many years, and we're like, we don't know what to do for you, but we'll
Mm.
figure it out, which meant my HR department thought that it was like, well, we're going to talk about it at the CIO and all his direct reports level and let them just tell everybody. So basically, everybody in our IT department, which was about 3,000 people, had to find out that I was trans and transitioning because of the role
Oh,
that I was
wow.
in.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just got really used then to just, having to it was a really big change, and um I lost a I lost some friends, and
Mm.
like people just didn't want to interact with me in the same way. But I always go back and tell people, I'm like, the biggest things about my transition is that my name and pronouns changed, but like I still was wearing the same clothes that I wore prior to transition, after transition. Like I still have some of them. Like not it wasn't like a drastic change. Like I grew a
Yeah.
beard. Like that was about it.
And
Like
you have the
not a
same
whole lot really
personality. Like
changed.
you're,
Exactly. Yeah, I'm like, I'm the same person. I just use different pronouns and I have a
Mhm.
different name now. That's it. So
Mm.
I feel like that helped some people because they were like, oh,
Mm.
you literally all you did was change your name and pronouns. But that's also the
Mhm.
hardest part for other people to change in their heads
Yeah.
are names and pronouns. They're like, we can see you're literally the same person, but that just those pieces are just so hard for people. But that was a super big change. And so that kind of just let me let me open up to be like, I can change a lot of other things about my life too, because I'm
Mm.
not beholden to these like standards that I was born with at this point. So that was
Yeah.
really cool.
Yeah. Wow. Um, yeah, it's changes like that. Um, it kind of makes me think of that phrase of like blowing your life up, because even though no
Hmm.
one, or most people who do a change that kind of blows their life up, they're not, that's not why they're doing it. That's just the
Right.
unfortunate consequences of it, is that it's going to impact so many other things. And so I think, of course, there are a lot of times where somebody might think, well, I would really want to make that change, whether it's, transitioning or something else, but it would blow my life up. And so therefore it's not an
Hmm.
option for me. So yeah, I mean, I imagine that it's not as simple as like a, well, it's worth it if, and there's a rubric. But yeah, I wonder what you would say about that if, someone was kind of saying like, I really do want to make this change, but it's going to have all this, domino effect on so many aspects of my life. And what am I supposed to do with that?
Exactly. I was like, I completely just like blew up everything, and like because people like most people in my life didn't know what that meant, and like
Hmm.
having to go and like tell these people and having these really awkward conversations with like your boss and stuff, and like trying to explain to them like what it means to be transgender, like because like we didn't talk about like me being a lesbian prior to that, like he was
Hmm.
cool with it. Like I showed up to the interview with like a whole suit and tie on, so like he knew I was different and he still hired me. But it was like that was just like one step too much. But ultimately he was like, "You're a great employee. Let me know if anybody is like mean to you, and we'll deal with it." And so that
Cool.
was just really cool. Like he definitely didn't understand it. I mean, like I taught that dude a lot transitioning. I taught a lot of people a lot, but
Yeah.
he didn't understand it. But he was like, "You're a good employee. You're a good person, and nothing really is changing. Like you're just using a different. Like at the end of the day, you're just using a different name and pronouns. Like that's not." He's like the best way he equated it is like I don't go by my first name, I go by my middle name. It's just kind
Hmm.
of like it's just what you prefer, and I prefer different pronouns than what I was assigned at birth.
Hmm. Yeah. And like you said, I mean, even since 2016, it's changed so much in terms of now there's this like kind of understanding, at least in many circles, of like, hey, maybe do some Googling and stuff yourself, and don't like force your trans friend to completely educate you on everything, right? But back in 2016, I don't think that that was necessarily the prevailing narrative, certainly for anyone who transitioned, 10, 20 plus years ago.
Mm. Exactly. I'm like, and I tell people, I'm like, I'll tell you about being trans, all day long, but like, can you buy me like a sandwich or something? Like, let's have some kind of like some kind
Exchange
of
of,
trade or
yeah,
transaction,
energy
something.
exchange.
But a lot of it has been, and so like I've been very fortunate to be in a place where I can be very visible about
Mm,
it. And because my work, like I transitioned very publicly at work, so I'm like, there's no point hiding it, because if I'm having to do this at work, there's no point trying to hide it in my private life if I'm having to do this at work. So I've been very fortunate with that, and so like that's been a huge benefit of mine, and I know that I'm very
mm,
privileged to be that way. And so like I definitely take that into consideration of like
yeah.
the companies that I work for, and have worked for, that they have all been like very cool with it. And that's one thing that I look for when I'm applying for new jobs is like, do you have gender identity in your non-discrimination policy? Because if you don't,
Nice.
immediately write off, because I'm like, this is not going to work, because I'm not going to like hide myself and put myself up in a place where I could potentially be fired for just who I am. I'm like, I don't have time for that. I already live in the South and I deal with enough of it anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. No kidding. Um, I don't know. This may be like a really obvious question, but what has been the best part of that change for you?
Just my happiness. Like
Mm,
I had been depressed and suicidal for years, and so like really just getting to be myself has just changed like my whole outlook, because like I really don't care. Like I don't have to really be beholden to what anybody wants me to be. I'm like, if you don't like who I am, then like you don't have to be friends with me. That's cool, but I'm gonna be over here doing me.
mm,
And so that's just been the best part, is just like the freedom that I've had to just like be myself and not have to worry about like fitting into any boxes. Like, yeah, I'm a dude that likes to quilt, and I also like farm. Like I have all of these various hobbies that are just a conglomeration of who I am as a person, and they don't fit neatly in one space or another. And so that's just been really nice. But ultimately, it's just like I just get to be who I want to be, and I don't really care about like what others have to say, because I'm like, I spent 26 years unhappy. I've spent the
mhm.
last six very happy. I'm like, I would not go back to that for anything at this point.
Yeah, yeah, that's amazing. You mentioned that kind of stepping into that really big change sort of opened the door for you to go, oh, I can actually, if I can change this, I can change anything. So what were some of the other things, or pick whichever one you want to start with, that you decided that you wanted to change?
Yeah, so I mean, like, probably for me was just I had always been told like, okay, your hair has to be like a certain way. I know that's like a
Mm,
really, but like hair is such a big thing in like professional spaces, and especially, being black, it's like, so like I always had
mhm,
like when I was growing up, my hair was always relaxed. And then when I was 23, I think I like cut it off to like a faux hawk. And then when I transitioned, I just completely like cut all my hair off. But
mm.
now I'm like, I can have dreads if I want to, and it's not a really big thing anymore. And like that's actually so like I can just like I can change what I look like, and people don't care as much. Another big thing is that like for years I was like, I'm not going to get any tattoos on my forearms because it's not seen as
Mm,
professional and all of
mhm.
that stuff. And so over over the pandemic and stuff, I'm like, you're hiring me for my knowledge. What I look like does not matter. So if I want to put dinosaurs on my forearm, I'm gonna put dinosaurs on my forearm, and you're going to be okay with it, or you just won't hire me, either one.
Yep.
But it's just kind of like I've kind of stopped living for like what the society expectations are of me, and like
Mm,
how you should be and how you should dress and stuff like that. And so that also meant finding companies that appreciate that. So
mhm.
like I now have dinosaurs on my forearm, which is a really big talking point when one of your manager has a 4-year-old that loves dinosaurs. We've become, I am now friends with a 4-year-old because I have
Yeah.
dinosaurs on my forearm. And so that's just been like, just that, like those expectations. I'm just like,
Mm.
I've already broken so many molds and doing whatever I want. So I'm just like, I'm just going to keep going at
Why
this
stop
point and just,
now? Yeah.
why stop? Like, I'm just going to do what I want. It's fine.
That's amazing. And yeah, we are, of course. I think it's so important to kind of name that, like, there's so much that is just fucked up today, right? In our culture, in our
Hmm.
society. And like obviously we know that. Um and to notice the changes that have happened slowly, or some just even more in recent years, it's pretty cool because even though, you could have taken that sort of stance of radical authenticity 20 years ago in corporate America, um, you might have had more trouble with it, right? Just externally. And it might still have been worth it. But it is neat to see, like you're saying, that even in sort of those more corporate settings, that sort of epitome of conforming to societal norms, people and organizations are starting to embrace, uniqueness and the fact that professional doesn't have to look one certain way.
Yeah, I think that's been the huge thing, and I think that the companies that are grasping onto that fact, and I think that fact also goes with like remote working and things like
Mm,
that. The companies that are grasping onto that today are going to be the ones that succeed and prevail because they realize that like we can't go back to how we were working 3 years ago. We have
mm,
found out that working from home for a lot of people, for some positions, is a more beneficial way. I'm like, I now work for a company based out of Seattle. So like
mm,
I am 100% remote, but just I don't have to worry about commuting to the office or worrying about traffic on the interstates or having a 3 hour commute go back and forth. And I'm like, I just wake up in the morning, I can work and I can do other stuff intermingle throughout my day because I don't have to just sit here for 40 hours and work all day. I'm like, I can go outside and check on my chickens, or I can go run down the street and, get some mail or do other things throughout the day that you used to have to cram in until like those few hours between the time you got home and the time you went to bed at night. And like now it's more interspersed. And so mine just my day to day is just completely different, but I think it's also a healthier way because I don't
mm.
have to, my mind does not work to be focused on something for 8 hours a day. So now I can just break it up into chunks. And now I actually get more productivity all day long across multiple avenues of my life
Mm.
versus just one of them, which is working.
Yeah, and it's like it kind of challenges, that sort of old notion of work-life balance. What I hear in that is like work-life integration. That, I don't know if you've
Mhm.
seen Severance on Apple TV. Have you seen it?
I
It's
haven't.
so good. I highly recommend. But
Okay.
basically, without spoiling anything, the premise is sort of like essentially that what if your work life could be completely separate, so that work life doesn't really have any recollection of your home life, and vice versa. And it completely siloed in that way. And of course, we know that is, sci-fi's mechanism of showing us the extreme version of something that we think might sound like
Hmm.
a good idea.
Right.
But that integration, it to me just seems like so much more of a healthy way to live, as opposed to like, oh, I, go and sort of slave away at the office for 8 hours just so that I can afford to enjoy the other 2 hours of my day.
Exactly. And that's what's been like so beneficial for me. I'm like, okay, so like I can go do my laundry when I'm walking to the other side of the house because I need to go get something from over there. And so like now I don't have to worry about my laundry piling up because I don't have time to do it because I'm exhausted by the time I work in Nashville for 9 hours and then I have to drive an hour and a half home. Then you have to fit in time to work out. And I'm like, now I just intermingle all of that time together. So I'm still getting the same amount of work done, but if I want to work at 10 p.m. because that's a better time for me to work, okay, as long as I make it to my during the day meetings, they're pretty okay with it. They're like, they don't care what time I work as long as I'm getting my work done and can produce on my deadlines. And I'm like, that's such a much better way to live than try to get everything done within 8 hours because it never happened. And then I'm like,
Hmm.
so I'm having to go to work, drive home, and then get back to work because I couldn't finish. And now I finish all my stuff on like a daily basis because you don't have people driving by and stopping by your desk or having to go search for food or go out to eat with people. I'm like, I just walk 10 feet to my kitchen and pick something up for lunch, and I come back here and do some work because I can multitask and do that versus others. So that's what's been really nice about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it'll be interesting to see, from kind of the macro perspective, how much of the COVID era changes remain. That's been sort of the phase we're in right now of companies trying to figure out, like, well, are we going to allow our people to stay fully remote? Are we going to make them do hybrid? Are we going to, it's just, it's all kind of shaking out now. And I've definitely heard of plenty of people who, similar to what you're saying, if their company was to say, well, okay, well, everyone needs to come back in the office, they'd say, all right, well, here's my 2 week notice. So,
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of why I switched companies. They were like, we're going to make you start coming back in 2 to 3 days a week. And I was like, you know what? I'm good. Like,
yeah.
there's so many jobs that I can do because like they put it like, well, they were like, if you're an hour outside of Nashville, you don't have to come in. But I'm like, an hour by what matrix? I'm an
Right.
hour away from Nashville in traffic
Yep.
during the work week. Like it was taking me an hour and 20 minutes to get to the office. Now, if you're talking about on a weekend, it's 45. So like, what's your hour matrix?
Yeah.
Like
What
that
an
doesn't,
arbitrary.
that's, it's
Yeah.
like that. I'm closer to Kentucky than I am to Nashville. But then it's like, you're going to make me come back in because I didn't move far away during the pandemic. But what about all the people who moved to other states? You're not making them come back in
Hmm.
and be back in the office, even though they're office-based positions. So I'm like, there was no equity in that. You're like, oh, because you didn't move away, now you're going to be punished and you have to come in. And I was like, that doesn't work for me.
Yep.
And so I went somewhere that I was like, you're 100% remote. Like, we want you to come in like once a quarter for an
Yeah.
on-site that we'll pay for. I'm like, that's great.
Cool.
I get to travel.
Yeah.
Cool. But I'm like, there's no point because I could go in the office and still have to have WebEx meetings because we had 20 different buildings in Nashville. So how is
Hmm.
that any more beneficial? I'm now
Right.
just sitting in Nashville instead of sitting at my house. I didn't understand it. And so that was a big change that I had this year is like I left a company I had been at for 12 and a half years.
Yeah.
Because I was like, you know what, this isn't benefiting me in the same way anymore. And
Yeah.
so that's probably I've been like needing to like change jobs for a while. And so it just finally got to like, here's the last straw. And I was like, you know
Hmm.
what? It's just time for me to go. And so ultimately that's what I did. And am much growing in a much different way now than I was at the company that I was at.
Cool.
I mean, I learned a lot there, but it was also time for me to go somewhere else.
Yeah. Cool. So, as far as the animals go, what is your name?
Mhm.
The Holloman House of Wayward Animals or something?
Yes, the House of Wayward Animals,
I
Holloman Home
love
of
it.
Wayward Animals. Yes, because that's just what we seem to acquire at this
Yeah.
point.
Did you grow up with a lot of animals, or is that another thing that has been a change in your life?
That is a big change. So growing up, I had some fish for a while. I had a dog when I was like 5 that lasted like 6 months. I had
Oh.
another dog when I was like 16 and he kept running away. And so that lasted about a
Mm.
year. And so then when I moved out and bought my first house, that's when I got a dog. And so I was like, this is great. I got like an 8-week old dog. And they're like, oh, he'll be like 50 pounds. I was like, that's great. That's a good size. This dog turned out to be like an 80 pounds as an adult. He was a big lab pit bull mix, but he was like super sweet. And so then I met Alicia. And so by that time I had 2 dogs and she had a dog. And so now it's just like a revolving door of animals that are coming in and out of this house. And so this year I was finally like, yes, you can start fostering dogs because she has wanted to do that the entire
Mm,
time that we've been together. And I was like, fine, you can start fostering dogs because one of us is always here at this point, and we're just kind of
yeah.
like, we were at a good place. And so we're like, cool, we'll foster dogs. And so now we just seem to acquire animals. And even before that, like the last two our true last dogs that we got before our most current set, we had a friend that moved away, and they their dog was older, and they didn't want to disrupt that dog by taking it to Texas, and
Mm.
so we ended up with that. She had a friend that had an aunt pass, and so they had a dog that needed a new home. So that is how dogs have been ending up at our house. Um, and so now the most current two with the rescue that we work with, that is how we have got our most current two dogs. So we have four permanent dogs, and then we have one foster right now, and then we have the chicken and the quail that I take care of outside.
Nice.
So I'm just kind of like anybody that's got a farm animal and I've got space, I will probably make it a home outside somewhere.
I love it. I love it. And I highly enjoyed the recent PowerPoint that Alicia made to make an argument for keeping one of the fosters and then your corresponding
Yes.
contract agreement. It was so good.
Yes, that was yeah, so we were kind of like so this year I was like 2020 and 2022 have both sucked in the
Mm,
very same way. We lost two dogs in 2020 and
mm,
we've lost two
mm.
dogs in 2022. And
Older
so we had
dogs
just
mostly,
got
right?
yeah, so they've mostly been
Yeah.
older dogs. Like the
Yeah.
ones we lost in 2020, we lost them to cancer. And then
Mm,
these, we lost two 12-year-old dogs. I mean, like these are older dogs.
yeah.
So it sucks. And so we had just got Matilda like maybe 3 weeks prior. And so she's like, Doug the pug was supposed to be a foster. And he was supposed to be a short-term foster for us because we already had a foster.
Hmm.
Um, and she was like, no, I don't want to keep him. And then like 2 days later, she's like, I want to keep Doug. And so she did the PowerPoint, which I was like, it appealed to my sense of needing like documentation. So I was like, fine, if you went through all this effort to put together a PowerPoint, I'm gonna put together a contract that says we can't get any more dogs that are going to be permanent residents here. I'm like, the max is 5. That is a lot of dog. That's a lot of
Uh-huh.
dog hair. That's a lot of dog food, especially when they all have different diets. No
Oh
one eats
gosh.
like the same thing or the same amounts.
Uh,
So it was like dinner time is like, okay, I have to remember which dog gets which thing, who has medication that needs to go in their food. I'm like, it's a lot. So it's like 5 is enough. Like if we had like 5 easy dogs, still 5 is enough. So
hmm.
then we wrote the contract, and so she's like, I really should have like bargained more in this contract. And I was like, no, 5 is enough. Like we're good.
Yep, you
We're
already
good at
signed
this
it.
point. You already signed it. We're good. And so that contract did not preclude me from getting more chicken. So I was like, that's good
Good.
because I need my chickens because we have a dog that continuously eats the chicken. So
Oh
I have to like,
no,
that's a
poor
whole thing.
chickens.
Yeah.
Oh,
I have I have a whole chicken a fortress outside to keep the
oh,
dog away
nice.
from them.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, an
So,
ever evolving
but I'm like,
security.
yeah, whenever I find holds in it, I basically have to go like plug those immediately because otherwise it's not a good time.
Yep. So you were saying at the beginning that even as someone who's now gotten pretty comfortable with pretty big changes, that you like to kind of take your time with it. You like to kind of do your research and really kind of prepare for it. Um, I just wonder if there's anything that you might say to someone who they have a change they're wanting to make and they're feeling kind of stuck or scared or paralyzed. What would you say to them?
Change doesn't have to be done quickly, and
Mm,
so take your time, think about it, because some changes are like can be super small, but they can also be super impactful because
mm,
I a lot of times think of like I do continuity planning for a living.
Hmm.
So I'm always thinking about like what are like the other things that potentially could happen. Like if I if X happens, what does Y needs to occur? And
Mm.
so so I think a lot about those type of things, but it's like always thinking about it doesn't have to happen quickly. Like if you want to make a change, think about it. Ask people that you know that have gone through similar changes. What was their thought process like? Because you want to feel comfortable in whatever change you make. I really feel like because if you try to make a change that is too quickly, at least for me, you may have to reverse course and it could be hard. Because I also want to make sure that like I'm not going to damage relationships, but ultimately you have to do what's best for you. So it's just really take your time with it because
Hmm.
if it takes you 6 months to make a change, but you're going to be and you're happy at the end of it, that's what really matters is ultimately making the changes to make yourself happy and not
Mm.
to make anybody else happy. Because if you make a change to make someone else happy, you're going to probably end up being very unhappy in the end.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. Um, and are there any changes that you are currently working on or kind of have on the horizon?
I guess probably my biggest change right now is that I am trying to get into goat farming.
Oh, wow.
And so this has been like about the last year. And so I've been doing a lot of research on like what's the best type of goats, what should you have? And the reason I want the goats is that we're on about 2 acres and
Yeah,
about an
for the
acre of it
grass.
is like is
Mm.
swampy. And so like if I take my mower down there, it gets stuck. But if I take a goat,
Mhm.
they won't get stuck. And I just think I just have enjoyed having like outdoor animals. It's a reason for
Mm,
me to go outside every day,
cool.
even if it's cold, even if since it's been like 90 something degrees
Oppressively
every
hot.
day. Yeah, I am forced to go out there and check
Mm,
on them every day. And so that is really what I like about it. And
mm,
so, but the way I really like to like acquire my animals is like, if somebody's like, having to like move or something, they can't take it with them. Like, I don't like want to feed into the like goat farming like industry.
yeah,
But like if
yeah.
something happens in somebody, because like that's how I got started in chickens, is that
Mm,
my friends needed to move away and they had chickens and we're getting out of the farm business. And so that's how I got them.
yeah.
Because like I don't want to milk them. I'm like, I just really want them to just be able to
Live
enjoy
their
their
life.
life and eat my grass,
That's
live their life,
awesome.
eat my grass. That's really what I want.
Cool.
So I'm like, should I get ones that, you can turn their hair into fiber because then it's like
Mhm.
it benefits them, it benefits me,
Mm,
things like that. People always ask me like, do you eat any of your animals? And I'm like,
mm,
no, we do not eat. We eat the chicken eggs,
mhm.
but like we don't eat them.
Yeah.
Because I'm just like they're in my backyard. Like I've been chilling with them.
They're
Like
my
that just seems a
buddies.
little weird for me. Yeah, I'm like we go out there and have conversations. Like that just seems a little weird.
Yeah, yeah.
At least to me. So, but that's probably like one of the biggest. Like I
Mm.
want to do that and ducks. That's the other
Okay.
thing. But I've learned that you can't put male ducks with female chicken hens.
Oh,
And so
good
I'm
to
like,
know.
all right, I got to build like a new enclosure. So I'm
Mhm.
like, those are all the things that are like coming up. So like when it cools down, hopefully this fall I can build out their enclosure. So next spring I can have ducks and goats. That would be really awesome.
Cool. Well, when that happens, I need to come out to see these animals and play with the goats.
Right? Right, exactly. I'm like, I feel like goats would be so much fun. I'm like, I want like the smaller ones too, because I'm like, I don't need a
Yeah,
goat that's going to be bigger than me. Like, I don't know.
right.
So I'm
You're not
like,
looking to
get some
get,
like
kicked in
miniature
the
goat.
shin or anything.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't want that. And I'm like, everybody talks about the fainting goats, and I'm like, I feel like that would just stress me out. Like that would just stress me out a little bit too much. Because what if they just fall? I'm like, if they don't get back up quick enough, I'm like, I just no, that doesn't seem like a good time.
Yeah. Oh man. Well, before we wrap up, is there anything else that you want to say about change or your relationship with change?
Uh, I would say that like my relationship with change is always ever evolving.
Is
I
always changing.
over the It is basically. Um, and I'm trying to get better with um things that change quicker than I want them to.
Hmm.
I do a really bad job of like um when like something changes in the house, like I will a lot of times notice it because I'm like, okay, something has changed in the environment.
Hmm.
This is not this is not okay. But because for like a long time, like I lived by myself, or like when I lived at home with my parents, like I had my own space, so like nobody bothered it. And so
Hmm.
I'm like, where is this thing? Like I put this thing here for a specific reason, and so a lot of times that means that we have to have a lot of conversations around it. um, but I'm trying to get better at that because there's some things about being able to make quicker changes and not have to
Mm.
think about it. Because like in like a crisis situation, I can make like decision and change stuff really quickly, but it's like my
Yeah.
day to day, it's like
Yep.
no, does not happen. Like I am still debating on like what color I want to paint my office, and it's been like 6 months. So like trying to get better at things like that because at the end of the day, it's just paint. But I think that's the thing is that like there's going to be times where it's easier, but I'm like, there's so much otherness going on that I'm like,
Hmm.
some days it's just about surviving to the end of the day without screaming at anybody. And if
Yep.
I done that, then that's a good day. So I'm just like, I'm not being too hard on myself because there's just a lot that is going on. And I'm like, if I just make it through the day, we've done a good job. So that's really,
Yep.
it's just trying to continuously make that relationship better, but also giving myself grace that like we're in a time that is ever changing that I have no
Hmm.
control over. And so I'm like, the things that I can control, I will try to control, but the things that I can't, I will like go outside and just hang out with my chickens until I calm back down. And I'm like, all right, this is good.
Yeah.
I don't have enough energy to worry about this anymore. So I'm just going to move on.
Yep, that reminds me of this idea that I really like about like the comfort zone is actually not a bad place to be, right? There's like so much of this like life begins at the edge of your comfort zone. And we know that we do have to get uncomfortable, which often means some kind of change to grow and to, have new experiences. And sometimes when we're doing a lot of growth and new stuff, it's really nice to then just come to our favorite place that we know is going to be the same every time, and we know our routine and we have our favorite drink there every time. And, so it's that kind of like ebb and flow of change and consistency.
Right. It's like when everything else is changing outside, I'm like, I like things to be here. If
Yeah.
everything's cool out there, then I'm like, okay, we have some time to like explore
Uh-huh.
and expand stuff. Or just giving me a heads up, like, hey, I'm thinking about making this change in like 3 months. That's great. That gives me time to think about it, recognize that it's going to happen, understand it, do any research that I need to do about it, things like that. So it's like I feel like, a few years ago, like things were just like really consistent, and now it's just like every day something else is blowing up.
Yep.
So I'm just kind of like, I'm just rolling with it. And so like,
Yep.
if things can't change around the house for a while, that's cool. I
Yeah.
survived the day, and that's what was really important.
Exactly. Well, this has been so much fun. Thank you for coming on and sharing some of your story and just uh helping us to think about change in some different ways.
Yeah, this is just exciting. I'm glad you were thinking about this topic because like change is just so impactful. And I think that this is a really good conversation to just realize that like change is everywhere. Nothing is going to stay the same. And so just thinking about how do you deal with it and how do you just roll in an ever-changing environment at this point.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here, and we'll chat soon. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you feel moved to share it with someone you think would love it, or maybe leave a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, I would be ridiculously appreciative. If you or someone you know has an interesting and inspiring story about change, please reach out and let me know. You can send any interview recommendations to creaturesofchangepodcast@gmail.com. For show notes for this and previous episodes, head over to GaiaCenter.co/podcast. That's GAIAcenter.co/podcast, where you can also check out our sister podcast, Bodyful. You can connect with me on Instagram at Val K. Martin, that's K-A-Y spelled out, and at the Gaia Center, which is the name of my Nashville-based therapy practice. You can also sign up for the Gaia Center monthly newsletter at bit.ly/Gaia Center News, where we'll share about groups and events we're offering locally, along with tips and resources from our therapists that we hope will be valuable and relevant wherever you may be listening from. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you next time.